There is a particular freedom that arrives at 30, not the freedom society intends for a woman of that age, which is no freedom at all, only the grey, polite invisibility of a woman who has missed her moment and must now make herself useful and undemanding and grateful for whatever table she is invited to sit at. That is not freedom. That is a sentence dressed as resignation. No. The freedom that arrives at 30 for a woman paying attention is something different entirely. It is the freedom of no longer being watched. Because here is the thing about society and its women. It watches the young ones. It watches the debutantes and the hopefuls and the girls in their first and second and third seasons with the focused intensity of an audience at a theatre, cataloguing every misstep, every dance, every whispered conversation, every bonnet that is slightly too daring for a girl who has not yet secured her future. It watches because those girls are still in play, still useful, still capable of doing something interesting or disastrous. A woman of 30, unmarried, without fortune or particular family to recommend her, is no longer in play. And a woman who is no longer in play can do almost anything she likes. Miss Harriet Voss had understood this for approximately 3 years, and she had been making the most of it with quiet, consistent, entirely unremarked up-on thoroughness. She had wanted to marry, once. She was, at 30, exactly who she was, and she found that person reasonably good company. She did not, as a rule, play games at evening parties. She made an exception on the night she met the Duke of Stanmore. His name was Sebastian Crail, 5th Duke of Stanmore, and his reputation preceded him the way a storm precedes itself. You felt it in the air before it arrived, a change in pressure, a particular quality of attention in the room. He was 34. He had been Duke since 21, which meant 13 years of managing a title that was old and significant and extremely inconvenient, because the Dukes of Stanmore had never been particularly good at being dukes, and Sebastian Crail was no exception. He was too clever for propriety, too honest for politics, too restless for the duties that being a duke required, and too responsible to entirely abandon them. He had scandals. Of course he had scandals. A man in his position, with his temperament, operating in society for 13 years, the absence of scandal would have been the remarkable thing. There had been a duel, early on, that everyone agreed had been unnecessary, and which he had won with an efficiency that made the other party wish they had chosen differently. There had been a period of about 2 years where he had appeared at every event with a different woman on his arm, which had generated a great deal of copy in the gossip sheets and had apparently, this was the detail society found most baffling, been entirely his companion's idea, as several of them had later confirmed with some fondness. He had stood up in the House of Lords and said things that were not supposed to be said, and had been right about them, which made it worse. He had refused 3 seasons of eligible matches, with a consistency that suggested not indifference, but a very specific idea of what he was looking for. He had not, apparently, found it. He arrived at Lady Pembroke's evening party on a Thursday in February, looking like a man who had come under mild protest, and intended to leave at the earliest possible opportunity, which was his standard arrival expression, and was generally accurate. Harriet noticed him the way she noticed everything, systematically, without apparent attention, from her customary position near the back of the room, where the light was good and the conversation was optional. She noticed the way the room adjusted around him when he entered, the way people angled toward him or carefully away from him, depending on their relationship to his reputation. She noticed that he accepted a glass of wine from a passing tray and then held it without drinking, which suggested he was not there for the wine. She noticed that he declined 3 separate invitations to join groups with the smooth efficiency of a man who has had a great deal of practice declining things without causing offence. She noticed with some interest that he scanned the room with the same systematic attention she herself used. Their eyes met. She did not look away. He did not look away. He crossed the room. "You've been cataloguing the guests," he said, without preamble. She replied, without apology. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite classify. Not surprise. He was not a man who surprised easily. Something adjacent to interest, carefully observed. "Miss Voss," she said. "Harriet Voss. I am 30 years old, unmarried, no fortune worth speaking of, and entirely invisible to 3/4 of the people in this room, which makes me an excellent observer." She paused. "You are the Duke of Stanmore. You need no introduction. Most people introduce themselves anyway, as a social formality. I find social formalities use up time that might be spent more usefully." She looked at him directly. "What were you looking for when you scanned the room?" He blinked, just slightly. "Specifically, yes." A pause. And then, with a quality of candor that surprised her slightly, "Someone interesting. And the jury," he said, "is still deliberating." Harriet considered this. "That is either a very smooth thing to say or a very honest one. In my experience, those are not mutually exclusive." She looked at him, at the sharp, somewhat battered intelligence of his face, and the quality of attention he was bringing to this conversation, which was the full kind, not the polite, partial attention of a man doing his social duty, but the actual kind, the kind that arrived with both eyes and stayed. She had not had that kind of attention in some time. "Lady Pembroke's parties," she said, "are about to become interesting." "Oh," he said. "She has decided this evening to introduce a game. I overheard her telling Mrs. Fanshawe about it 20 minutes ago." Harriet nodded toward the far end of the room, where Lady Pembroke was arranging a circle of chairs with the determined energy of a woman executing a plan. "Truth or dare. She believes it will liven up the season." The Duke of Stanmore looked at the chairs. Then he looked at Harriet. "Are you going to play?" he asked. "I had not intended to," she said. A pause. "Neither had I," he said. They looked at each other. "And yet," said Harriet. "And yet," said the Duke. Lady Pembroke was 62 and had been orchestrating drawing-room entertainments for 40 years, and she ran the thing like a military operation, dressed in lavender silk. The rules were simple. The circle was seated. You were asked truth or dare. If you chose truth, you must answer the question, put to you honestly. Completely honestly. No evasions, no half measures. Lady Pembroke herself would be the judge of sufficiency. If you chose dare, you must complete the task assigned. There was no third option. There was no escape. The circle consisted of 12 people. 8 of them had been collected by Lady Pembroke, with the general intention of providing entertainment. 2 were young men who had come hoping for sport and were getting considerably more than expected. 1 was Mrs. Fanshawe, who would rather have been anywhere else, but was too loyal to Lady Pembroke to say so. And 2 of them, by a combination of momentum, curiosity, and the particular atmosphere of a February evening that had run out of other things to offer, were Miss Harriet Voss and the Duke of Stanmore. They sat across the circle from each other. Harriet could feel, from that distance, the quality of his attention. It had not diminished. The game began with easy territory. The younger guests asked each other predictable truths. Had you ever been kissed? Had you ever told a lie to your mother? Did you prefer the Viscount Haverley or Lord Pemberton? And the dares were gentle. Recite a line of poetry, sing a verse, walk across the room with a book balanced on your head. Harriet watched, answered her first truth. What do you think of the season? With sufficient honesty to make 3 people laugh and 2 people uncomfortable, which she considered appropriate. Completed her first dare. Write a poem about the person sitting opposite, with a speed and competence that made the Duke of Stanmore read the poem twice. He looked up from it. This is quite good. Truth or dare, said Lady Pembroke, redirecting. And so they came to it. The circle turned. It was Harriet's turn to ask. And she looked across at the Duke of Stanmore, who was watching her with that full, careful attention, and she said, Your Grace, truth or dare? A pause. The room, which had been at a pleasant social simmer, went slightly quieter. Because this was interesting. The known spinster and the scandalous duke looking at each other across Lady Pembroke's circle, and everyone in the room understanding simultaneously that whatever happened next was not going to be the ordinary kind of party entertainment. The Duke looked at her for a long moment. "Truth," he said. Harriet had prepared for both answers. She asked the truth question she had been holding since the moment he sat down. "You have refused," she said, "every eligible match proposed to you in 3 seasons. Not from indifference. Your manner suggests a man capable of strong attachment. So what is the actual reason?" The room held its breath. The Duke was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is thinking, not stalling. "Because," he said, "I have spent 12 years in rooms full of women who want the title, and women who want the fortune, and women who have been told by their families to want those things so consistently that they can no longer tell the difference between wanting and being directed. And I have not yet found, in 12 years, a woman who would look me in the eye in the middle of a conversation and tell me that social formalities waste time that could be better spent." He paused. "Until this evening." The silence in the room was absolute. Harriet looked at him. She felt the room looking at her, and she did not particularly care about the room. "That," she said carefully, "is a very honest answer. You asked for a very honest answer." "I did." She paused. "Your turn." He looked at her, the full attention undiluted. "Miss Voss, truth or dare?" She had known, from the moment she agreed to sit in this circle, what she was going to say. She was 30 years old and invisible and entirely free, and freedom, she had decided, was wasted on caution. "Dare," she said. Something moved in his eyes. Not surprise. Something closer to recognition. He considered for a moment, and then he said, with perfect calm, "I dare you to step outside with me, onto the terrace, for 5 minutes. Alone." He held her gaze. "And have an honest conversation, not a party conversation, an actual one." The room produced a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a murmur. Lady Pembroke looked between them with an expression of profound, barely concealed delight. Harriet stood up. 5 minutes, she said. It was February, and it was cold. Harriet was grateful for the cold. It gave her something to feel that was not the very complicated thing she was already feeling. The terrace looked out over the dark garden, and London beyond it, and the sky above London, which was never quite dark in the city, always that particular amber grey of a million candles and fireplaces viewed from distance. She stood at the railing. He stood beside her. Not too close. The appropriate distance. She was noticing, careful about distances in a way that suggested awareness of their significance, rather than indifference to them. "You have 5 minutes, she said. "You requested an honest conversation." "I did." He turned slightly toward her. "I want to ask you something that the game would not quite allow." "Ask. What do you want?" he said. "Not from the game. Not from this evening. In general. What does Harriet Voss want, who is 30 and invisible, and tells me social formalities are a waste of time?" She looked at the garden, at the dark and the amber sky. "I want," she said carefully, "to be taken seriously, not managed, not humoured, not tolerated as an eccentric by people who think my best years are behind me. I want a conversation in which the other person is genuinely interested in what I think, not merely in what I can provide." She paused. "I want to be in a room, any room, and feel that my presence in it is a choice rather than an inheritance of circumstance." "And in a marriage?" he asked. "If one were hypothetically on offer." She had to look at him directly. "We have been speaking for 40 minutes. This is not the usual trajectory." "I told you," he said, "I am not interested in the usual trajectory. You would like me to say I want love, a grand passion, to be swept away." She kept her voice level. "I am 30. I have observed enough marriages from the outside to have adjusted my expectations in the direction of reality. What does reality look like? A man who is honest with me," she said, "who does not manage me or maintain me from a polite distance, who has his own mind and does not require me to pretend to have less of mine." She paused. Who makes me laugh? That is not a small thing. I find I am extremely unwilling to spend my life without laughing. Those are, he said, remarkably achievable requirements. Most people find them remarkably inconvenient ones, she said. A woman with a mind is generally considered high maintenance. A woman with a mind, he said, is generally the only kind worth maintaining. She looked at him, at the dark eyes and the sharp face and the 13 years of scandal and the full undivided attention. Sebastian Crail, she said slowly, are you, in the middle of Lady Pembroke's truth or dare, attempting to court me? I am, he said without apology, attempting to determine whether I would like to court you. There is a distinction. And your determination so far? A pause. Strongly leaning, he said. Harriet looked back at the amber sky. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way that she had not been aware of for some time, and found faintly annoying because it was inconvenient, and she had not given it permission. We should go back in, she said. We have been out here longer than 5 minutes. Considerably longer, he agreed, neither moving. Lady Pembroke will be delighted. Lady Pembroke orchestrated this entire evening specifically for this outcome. I have known her for 20 years and I recognize her work. Harriet laughed. A short, genuine, unguarded laugh. She did seem very pleased with her circle. She has been trying to find me a suitable match for 3 seasons. She is going to be insufferable about this. And yet, said Harriet. He turned to look at her. And yet, he said, they went back inside. The room received them with an attention that was admirably disguised as casual socializing. Lady Pembroke's expression was the expression of a woman who has played a long game and watched it succeed, and she composed it into something more neutral approximately 2 seconds after they entered, which was 2 seconds too late. The game continued. But something had shifted. In the circle, in the room, in the particular air between 2 people who have stood on a cold terrace together and been honest with each other, and found the honesty more interesting than the alternative. Society talked, of course. Society always talked. The Duke of Stanmore and the Spinster on Lady Pembroke's terrace for considerably longer than 5 minutes. By the time that the story had made its second circuit of drawing rooms, it was 20 minutes. By the third, it was half an hour, and one particularly creative account had them there for the majority of the evening, with the rest of the party conducting the game entirely without them. None of this was accurate. All of it was energetic. Harriet's brother, a good-natured man named William, who worried about her with the dedicated inefficiency of someone who knew she did not require it, arrived at her door at 9 the next morning with 2 newspapers, and the expression of a man who has heard something and is not entirely sure what to do with it. There is, he said, setting the newspapers on her breakfast table, a great deal of conversation. I imagine so, said Harriet, pouring her tea. Harriet, the Duke of Stanmore. I am aware of his name, William. He is, William searched for the word. He is not straightforward. He is extremely straightforward. That is precisely what makes him interesting. She looked at her brother over her teacup. I am 30 years old. I am not going to be managed into caution about a man who talked to me like an equal for 40 minutes and asked me what I wanted. William sat down. He was 35 and he loved his sister. And he had spent 3 years watching her be invisible and finding it quietly enraging on her behalf. He was not, if he was being honest with himself, opposed to the Duke of Stanmore. He was simply startled by the speed of it. What did you think of him? He asked. Harriet considered this. I thought he was honest, more honest than men of his position usually permit themselves to be. She paused. I thought he was. I thought there was a great deal more to him than the scandals suggest, which is generally true of people whose reputation is mostly other people's editorializing. She set down her cup, and I thought that if he calls this morning, which I suspect he might, I would like to speak with him again. William looked at his sister. At the composure of her, the directness of her, the 30 years of accumulated self-knowledge, all right? he said. I will be in my study, being available for any brother-type formalities that might be required. She smiled. Thank you, William. The Duke of Stanmore called at 11 o'clock. He brought no flowers, which she found she preferred. He came with himself, coat, hat, gloves, the full undivided attention, and was received in the front parlour, where William performed his brief brotherly introduction with the slightly self-conscious efficiency of a man who was not entirely sure of the protocol for introducing his 30-year-old spinster sister to a duke she had met over a game of truth or dare. When William withdrew, the Duke sat across from Harriet in the morning light, which was less flattering than candlelight, and which he appeared not to notice, and he said, I have thought about last night, the things you said on the terrace. He paused. I would like to continue the conversation, at whatever pace you find appropriate, with the understanding that this is not a project or a curiosity. I am not interested in your novelty. He met her eyes. I am interested in you. Harriet held his gaze. And what does that look like in practice? In practice, it looks like calling in the mornings when you are available. Walking if you would like to walk. Talking about the things we actually think, not the things we are supposed to think. He paused, and perhaps, eventually, returning to the question I asked on the terrace, about what you want, with myself as a potential answer. She looked at this man, at his sharp, honest face and his careful directness and the particular quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of a man with nothing going on, but the stillness of a man with a great deal going on that he had learned to keep contained. You should know, she said, that I am not biddable. I will not become more biddable with time. I am not looking for biddable, he said. I spent 12 years looking for someone who was not. I am told frequently that I am too direct. You are precisely direct enough. I have opinions about things that are considered outside a woman's purview. Which things? Parliamentary reform, agricultural policy, the poor laws, she paused. The specific injustice of a world that tells women their minds are their most valuable asset and then penalises them for using them. He was quiet for a moment. I spoke in the Lords last March about parliamentary reform, he said. My position was considered too radical by approximately everyone, and completely correct, by approximately anyone who had read the actual evidence. A pause. I would be very interested in your thoughts. Harriet looked at him. You, she said slowly, are going to be an extremely inconvenient development. The Duke of Stanmore smiled. It was not the polished social smile she had seen him deploy at Lady Pembroke's party. It was the other one. Sudden, real, arriving without announcement. I have been told, he said, that I am extremely inconvenient. I have never before considered it a point in my favour. Everything has its context, said Harriet. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. The Ton, which had been watching with considerable interest, found that watching did not provide the scandal it had anticipated. Because the thing about the Duke of Stanmore and Miss Harriet Voss was that it did not look like what people expected a Duke and Spinster attachment to look like. It did not have the quality of rescue. He did not look at her with the particular benevolent condescension of a man elevating someone from obscurity. And she did not look at him with the gratitude and relief of a woman who has been saved from invisibility. They looked, to the careful observer, like two people who had found each other interesting and were proceeding on that basis with a directness that was slightly alarming. They walked in the park and had arguments about agricultural policy that were overheard by several people and reported with some bewilderment in drawing rooms across London. They attended a lecture together, not a fashionable lecture, but an actual lecture at a learned society, which the Duke had been attending for years and which Harriet had been attending separately for 2. And they had, on meeting at the door, started laughing at the coincidence with the genuine, unguarded quality of 2 people who have stopped performing for each other. Lady Pembroke received credit. She received it at every dinner party for the remainder of the season, and she accepted it with the becoming modesty of a woman who knows exactly what she did and is entirely pleased about it. And through all of it, through the walking and the arguing and the lectures and the morning calls, the game continued. Not the formal game with a circle and Lady Pembroke as arbiter, the version they had developed between themselves, the habit of honesty, the ongoing exchange of truths, the particular quality of being with someone who would not accept an evasion and did not offer one. He told her about the duel. The full account, not the story that circulated, which was dramatic and vague, and missing the significant detail that he had challenged a man who had been systematically lying to 3 families about his financial position and his intentions, and had been refused by the proper authorities, and had chosen the last available mechanism. He had been 23. He was not proud of all of it. He was not ashamed of the essential decision. She listened. She asked the questions that needed asking, not the questions designed to excuse or condemn. She formed her own view, which she told him, which happened to coincide with his own view, but arrived there independently, which mattered. She told him about the young man at 24, the attachment, the hope, the failure of nerve. His failure, not hers, though she had spent some time examining her own role in it before concluding that she had not, in fact, done anything wrong except want something from a person who turned out not to have it to give. He listened. He did not say the young man was a fool, though his expression did the work of saying it. He asked how long it had hurt. She told him honestly, and he received the honesty with the seriousness it deserved. They were 3 weeks into this, the calling and the walking, and the arguments and the ongoing game, when he appeared one morning with an expression she had not seen before, something under the surface of the usual composure, not distress. Something more careful than distress, the expression of a man who has made a decision and is now in the process of doing it. She waited. "I want to ask you a truth," he said, "but I want to give you a truth first, as a context." "Go ahead," she said. He looked at his hands, then at her. "I am not easy to live with," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I am demanding, not of others, I hope, but of situations. I require things to make sense. I will argue a point that I believe is correct past the point of social comfort. I am told I am." He paused. "The word used most frequently is relentless. I am familiar with the quality," she said. "I have been described as stubborn since the age of 7. I am also." He stopped. Started again. "I have spent 12 years not letting people in, not out of coldness. Out of the understanding that people were interested in what I was rather than who I was. And I have been careful, perhaps too careful, about the difference." He met her gaze. "I would not be careful with you. I find that I am incapable of being careful with you, in the sense that I mean. I say the actual thing. I think the actual thought. You have." He stopped. "You have made it impossible to maintain the distance. I want you to know that I consider that the most significant thing that has happened to me in a very long time." The room was very quiet. "Sebastian," she said. "Yes, ask your truth." He looked at her. "If I asked you to marry me, not now, not today. I understand this has been 3 weeks, and 3 weeks is not sufficient time to make a decision of this size. But if I were to ask, in the proper course of things, with the proper conversation between myself and your brother, and between ourselves about what we both want and what we can honestly offer each other." He paused. "Would you consider it possible that the answer might be yes?" She looked at this man. At 3 weeks of mornings and arguments and honesty, and the particular rare sensation of being taken seriously by someone who had every reason, by society's accounting, to look straight past her. She thought about what she had said on the terrace. "A man who is honest with me, who does not manage me or maintain me, who has his own mind and does not require me to pretend to have less of mine, who makes me laugh." She thought about agricultural policy arguments in the park and the lecture at the Learned Society and the full undivided attention that had not wavered in 3 weeks. Truth, she said. He waited. Yes, she said. It is possible. Something in his face did something she had never seen it do before. All the careful composure dropped entirely for one completely unguarded second, and what was underneath was so simple and so real that she had to look away for a moment. When she looked back, the composure was returning, but the thing underneath it was still visible, like a light through a window. "Good," he said. "That is, good. It is early," she said. "Yes. We have a great deal more arguing to do first, almost certainly. About the poor laws alone, I expect we have at least 4 significant disagreements." "At least," he said. "I look forward to all of them." She looked at him. At this inconvenient, relentless, completely honest man who had sat down across a circle of chairs 3 weeks ago and looked at her with the actual kind of attention and not looked away. "Sebastian," she said. "Yes, truth or dare," he smiled. That sudden, real, unannounced smile. "Truth," he said. "Always truth." "Are you happy?" she asked. "Right now, in this moment?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." It arrived, as obstacles generally do, at the least convenient moment. 3 weeks after the morning call in which the word marriage had been introduced. Carefully, conditionally, in the properly uncertain terms of 2 people who were still in the process of knowing each other. Harriet received a call from a woman she had not expected. Her name was Lady Constance Farrow. She was 45, beautifully dressed, and the particular kind of composed that is indistinguishable from coldness until you have been looking at it long enough. She was also, she made clear within the first 5 minutes, a very old and very close friend of the Stanmore family. She had come, she said, with the best of intentions. She had come, Harriet understood, with an extremely clear agenda. "Miss Voss," said Lady Constance, accepting her tea with the practised grace of a woman who has accepted tea in difficult circumstances many times. "I hope you will take what I am about to say in the spirit in which it is intended, which is one of genuine care, for you and for Sebastian." "I am listening," said Harriet. "Sebastian is." Lady Constance paused, as though selecting her words from a collection that had been curated in advance. "He is not consistent in his attachments. He is, as I think anyone would agree, a man of very considerable feeling. But that feeling, it has not, in 13 years, settled. He forms strong attachments, and then—" Another pause. "He withdraws, not from cruelty. He is not a cruel man." She looked at Harriet with something that was shaped like sympathy and felt like something else. "I would not want to see a woman of your age, a woman who has managed, I am sure, very well, disappointed." Harriet set down her teacup. "Lady Constance," she said, "I want to make sure I understand what you are saying. You are telling me that the Duke of Stanmore is unreliable in his attachments, that he will withdraw, and that I, a woman of my age, should not allow myself to hope." She paused. "Is that correct?" Lady Constance smiled the smile of a woman who has delivered this message before and found this particular translation of it slightly too direct. "I am simply saying that caution—" "I am familiar with caution," Harriet said. "I have been advised to exercise it by various well-meaning people for approximately 8 years. The advice has not improved with repetition." She looked at Lady Constance steadily. "I would like to ask you something directly, and I would like you to answer me directly in return." Lady Constance blinked. "Of course! Does the Duke of Stanmore know you are here?" A pause. Too long a pause. "He does not," Lady Constance said. "I see." Harriet nodded. "And what is your actual interest in this situation?" "Because I find that people who come to deliver warnings on behalf of others generally have a specific reason for caring about the outcome." The silence was very particular. Lady Constance's composure did not break. It simply thinned. Just slightly. Enough. "I have known Sebastian for 20 years, she said carefully. "Yes," said Harriet. "I rather thought it was something like that." She stood. She was entirely calm. She did not feel entirely calm. There was something happening in her chest that was either anger or fear, and she was fairly confident it was anger, which was more useful. "Lady Constance," she said, "I am 30 years old. I have spent a significant portion of that 30 years being told, by various people with various interests, what I should and should not expect from my life. I have examined that advice carefully and found it to be, on the whole, more about the adviser than about me." She held the woman's gaze. "I am going to continue knowing the Duke of Stanmore. If, in the course of that continued acquaintance, I find that your warnings have substance, that he is indeed inconsistent, that he withdraws, I am entirely capable of drawing my own conclusions." She paused. "I would prefer to draw them from the evidence rather than from the testimony of someone who came here without his knowledge." Lady Constance rose. She was, give her credit, composed. "You are very direct, Miss Voss." "I am," said Harriet, consistently. After Lady Constance left, Harriet sat for a moment in the quiet of the parlour. Then she picked up her teacup, finished her tea, and sent a note to the Duke of Stanmore, asking if he was available to walk that afternoon. She had a truth to tell him. He arrived at 3 o'clock, and she told him immediately, because she had decided that the longer she waited, the more it would become a thing rather than simply a fact, and facts were easier. She told him Lady Constance had called. She told him what Lady Constance had said. She watched his face go through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, understanding, something darker, and then a kind of exhausted resignation that told her this was not, for him, entirely without precedent. "She had no right," he said. His voice was very controlled. "To come here without my knowledge and—" "She has feelings for you," Harriet said simply. He stopped. "She has had them for some time, I think," Harriet continued. "And she is not. I don't believe she is an entirely bad person. I believe she is a person who wants something and has decided that I am the obstacle to it, and has chosen an approach that she thought might work." She paused. "I am telling you this not because I want you to do anything about it, but because I said we would be honest, and not telling you seemed like the beginning of not being honest." He looked at her. Something in his expression was very raw. "She is not wrong," he said. "That I have not been consistent, in the past. That there have been attachments that did not." He stopped. "I want to explain that to you. I want you to hear it from me. I am listening." He sat down. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees in a way that was entirely unlike the Duke of Stanmore that society saw, which was composed and upright and managed. He looked, in this moment, like a man who was simply himself. "The women I have known," he said carefully, "in the past, the attachments, they did not. I pulled back from them, yes, that is true, because in each case I reached a point where I understood that what they wanted was the Duke, the title, the story, not the actual person underneath it, which is significantly more difficult and less glamorous." He paused. "I am not saying that to excuse myself. I could have been clearer, sooner. I should have been." He looked at her. "But I want you to understand that what I mean when I say I am interested in you is that you are the first person, in a very long time, who has been interested in the actual person, who has argued with me about the poor laws and asked me hard questions in a game of truth or dare, and stood on a cold terrace and told me exactly what you want without dressing it up." He paused. "I am not going to pull back from that. I would not know how. You have made it." He stopped. "Impossible to maintain the distance," she said. He looked up at her. "Yes, those were my words. I remembered them." He held her gaze. "Harriet, I want to ask you something." "Ask." "Has Lady Constance's visit changed your mind?" She thought about it. Genuinely considered it, for the proper length of time, because he deserved the genuine consideration and not the quick reassurance. Then she said, "No. If anything, it has clarified it." "Clarified it? How?" "She came here to warn me off," Harriet said. "She told me you were unreliable and that I should manage my expectations. And my response to that, the thing I felt, sitting across from her in my own parlour, was not doubt. It was anger. She paused. I find that anger is generally a very accurate indicator of what I actually want. And what I was angry about was the possibility of losing something I had decided I wanted to keep. The room was quiet. Sebastian Crail, 5th Duke of Stanmore, looked at the woman sitting across from him, this 30-year-old woman who had spent her invisible years becoming entirely, formidably herself, and he said, "Marry me," not as a question with conditions, not as a careful, conditional approach to the subject, just, "Marry me." Harriet looked at him. That was not a very long courtship. It was a very thorough one. His voice was steady. I know what I want. You know what you want. We have both established that neither of us has any patience for doing things for the sake of form when the substance is already clear. He held her gaze. Harriet Voss, will you marry me? She looked at this inconvenient, relentless, entirely honest man. She thought about the cold terrace and the circle of chairs and truth, or dare and agricultural policy, and the full undivided, entirely unmanageable attention that had not wavered once. She thought about what 30 years of knowing exactly who you are finally makes possible. The kind of yes that is not hope or surrender or desperation, but simply a clear-eyed, fully informed, completely chosen yes. Yes, she said, I will. He crossed the room. He took her hand, her actual hand, held it properly, as a man holds the hand of someone he intends to keep. And he looked at her with that completely unguarded expression, the one she had seen in flashes and was now seeing in full. And it was so entirely real that she had to take a breath. Truth, always, he said. Lady Pembroke received the news of the engagement at a breakfast on a Thursday morning and produced a sound of such profound satisfaction that her butler came to check on her. She spent the morning writing letters. She spent the afternoon receiving callers who had come to discuss the engagement and found her entirely prepared to do so at length and with great enthusiasm. She spent the evening at a dinner where she sat at the centre of the conversation about it, with the quiet magnificence of a woman whose plan has come off exactly as intended. She is 30, someone said, not unkindly. One does not generally expect. One, said Lady Pembroke, with the authority of 62 years of watching people underestimate women, does not generally know what to expect until one pays proper attention. She picked up her wine glass. Harriet Voss has been the most interesting person in every room she has entered for the past 5 years. The room simply wasn't looking. And Stanmore? Stanmore, said Lady Pembroke, has been looking for someone to look back at him with equal attention for 13 years. She smiled the smile of a woman who has been absolutely right about something and intends to enjoy it. Simply put them in a circle and gave them a game. Truth or dare, someone said. Truth, said Lady Pembroke. It was always going to be truth. Here is the truth about truth or dare. The dare is exciting. The dare is the theatre of it. The performance, the spectacle, the walk across the room with a book on your head. People choose dare because it feels bold, because it looks brave, but the truth is braver. Sitting across a circle from someone and being asked a direct question and answering it, honestly. Not the answer that serves you, not the answer that performs well, but the actual answer, the one that costs something to say. That is the braver thing. That is the thing most people spend their entire lives finding elaborate ways to avoid. Harriet Voss had been telling the truth for 30 years. Not because she was reckless, not because she had nothing to lose, but because she had learned. In the particular school of a life lived on the edges of society's attention, that the truth was the only currency that held its value. Everything else, performance, management, the careful arrangement of oneself for other people's comfort, depreciated. The truth did not. Sebastian Crail had been surrounded for 13 years by people who wanted something from what he was. And he had been honest in reaction to that, bluntly, sometimes inconveniently, in the way that people are honest when they have stopped caring about the cost. But he had not been honest in the other direction. He had not offered himself up. He had not been the one to cross the room, until a woman with no name worth speaking of and no fortune worth counting looked at him across a circle of chairs and asked him, in a room full of people, with no particular respect for the direction the question was supposed to travel, what he was actually looking for. He had told her the truth. She had heard it. She had told him the truth in return, on a cold terrace with the amber London sky above them. And they had built something from that, not from impression, not from strategy, not from the careful management of what the other person was allowed to know, but from the actual material, the real thing, each of them as they actually were. That is not a small thing to build a marriage on. It is, in fact, the only solid thing to build it on. Lady Pembroke, who had orchestrated the whole affair and would remind people of this for the rest of her natural life, put it best at the wedding breakfast, in the toast she gave that was overlong and entirely worth it. Society, she said, had written this woman off. Society was wrong, as it generally is about women who have the poor taste to keep getting more interesting after 25. She raised her glass to the Duke and Duchess of Stanmore, who told each other the truth from the beginning, and who will, I am quite certain, continue to do so at considerable length and with mutual enjoyment for the rest of their lives. The room drank. Harriet Voss, Harriet Crail, Duchess of Stanmore, looked at her husband across the toast, and he looked back at her, and the attention was full and undivided and entirely mutual, and neither of them looked away. Truth, she thought, always truth. The end. Thank you so much for watching. If you loved this story, please like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me your favourite moment. Was it the terrace? The proposal? Lady Pembroke? A brand new story every single week. See you next time.